Thanks for joining us for the latest episode of the Secure Connections podcast, brought to you by IoTSSA, the Internet of Things Security Services Association. I'm your host, Brian Sherman, Content Director for IoTSSA, and joining me for today's episode is Zak Karsan, CEO of Vault America, a channel-only hybrid cloud data protection and availability solutions vendor. His team helps MSPs back up, recover, archive, and discover data on-site and in the cloud for their SMB clients without physical hardware appliances. Welcome back to the Secure Connections podcast, Zak.
Thanks very much, Brian. Great to be here.
Good. Looking forward to digging deeper into one of the most common yet rarely discussed concerns of the IT services community. Protecting data stored in the various types of clouds used by your SMB clients doesn't sound sexy all the time, but at the same point, it's a vital thing that I think needs to be covered regularly and thoroughly. So, in other words, are you able to replicate all the information contained in the unknown nooks and crannies of your customers' computer systems? I think that's the gist of what we're going to do today. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. It is. And I think to kind of go into it, we kind of need to know a little bit around, the different types of clouds that exist, right? You have Nimbus, Cumulus, Cirrus, Stratus. All right. Wrong industry, but now seriously, at the core, in my opinion, there are two kinds of clouds, private and public. Then you can, of course, mesh the two together, forming a hybrid cloud. And depending on the size of the end customer, they may have built their own internal private cloud, and I actually say built, not build, since most customers today, I think, would rather leverage someone else's private cloud or even a public cloud instead of paying to build one themselves. This is not always the case, however, because obviously customers are different sizes and different types, so they have different requirements. But I know from my experience, I think most companies are operating in a hybrid cloud capacity, leveraging both the public cloud and external private clouds, as well as their own internal networks, which can be considered their own internal private cloud. After all, essentially a cloud, right, is just another name for a data center someplace with computer hardware storage, software applications, power bandwidth, and the like. But to answer your question, or the question about are you able to replicate all the information contained in the unknown nooks and crannies of your computer systems, yes, absolutely, that can be done. But really, does the customer really need to protect everything? And that's ultimately the question.
Right. And I think I guess the other question too is how does mobility play into this? Because if you think about the bigger scheme is you've got all of the cloud options that you mentioned, but you've got people with smartphones now, your tablets, your laptops, all of the various devices and ensuring, you think about some of these, even an SMB organization with 50 employees, well, if a lot of employees are working remotely or other places, you're scattering a lot of information in a variety of silos, which can be difficult to manage. Is that been a big challenge, or what are, I guess, some of the best practices of making sure you're gathering as much of that information as often as possible?
Yeah, I think that if you look at it from an MSP perspective, where just like you said, client data runs across networks, apps, devices, locations, things of that nature, right? So the good thing is that MSPs, in my opinion, they have access to a plethora of vendors and tools that they can evaluate, procure, to ensure they are protecting client data wherever that resides, ultimately making it available, right? So it can be accessible to their clients really wherever, whenever their clients will need it. But really at the core, I feel that there must be a data classification effort. Okay, and I'll kind of break that down just a little bit, since I think it's quite important, where there are essentially four essential activities of a successful data classification effort. And I think MSPs should really include this and should walk through these activities with their customer to help them understand what data of theirs should be protected and at what levels. There are four activities, right? Identify, locate, classify, and value. I don't want to throw another acronym in this world we live in, but ILCV, just for the heck of it. But identify the data, okay? locate, identify where that data resides, classify, categorize, and determine which data needs to be protected. And then finally, if possible, assign a value to that data. And that needs to be possible. And maybe that's something that needs to be done, obviously, with the MSP, with the customer on a consulting approach, whatever it might be. I think just looking at initially right now, just looking at identifying the data, which really sounds pretty straightforward, right? Just identify the data, right? But systematically identifying the data within a customer organization can be quite challenging, right? It's really not an activity that you can delegate to somebody. It needs to be kind of embedded, or you need to be embedded within the organization. Within the organization, it needs to kind of be cross-functional and organized around business processes and driven by process owners. So really having the ability to walk through each business process, tracing the data flows within the process, through the owners, identifying that data. And I'll give you a couple examples, but really, they're key questions to be able to identify that data, right? That is maintained by your organization to say, okay, part of that data classification effort, how do we identify that data, right? And I'll just kind of throw them out there, but what data does your organization collect from or about customers, suppliers, trade partners, right? That's one question to ask. What data do you generate about these stakeholders through the course of business? What proprietary data do you create in the course of product development, manufacturing, marketing, and sales? Maybe one is more prevalent than another, depending on the type of company and customer and operation that they perform. Transactional data, what transactional data do you obtain or generate in the course of business? All of this collected and generated data, what is private, what is confidential, ultimately identifying, cataloging all this types of data is really the first step in the classification process, and serves really as a basis, right, for all other activities or classification activities, I should say.
Are there certain industries that this is a bigger nightmare for than others? I shouldn't say nightmare, because honestly, it's an opportunity for the channel, but
it is definitely an opportunity for a channel. It is also a nightmare to gather the information. So I completely sympathize, and I'm sure MSPs maybe listening would kind of understand and say, yeah, how do I even go about this? And with the way business models are today, this is almost a consultative approach, right? Somehow maybe you can embed this into the onboarding if you're an MSP. But there's some time and effort that goes into this, right? At the same time, I really believe this is the foundation of a very consistent revenue stream when it comes to data protection for MSPs, because it really gets their customers to understand. But I think, with today's businesses and their systems really being so tightly integrated, data's shared across systems. They might reside in multiple systems. Maybe they're reporting systems and data warehouses, transactional data. It's even when you look at companies that have photocopiers, right? That now they're involved with making those copies, that paper, imaging that, right, and then storing those electronic copies of what was once physical data, right? Where's that information? Right. So a lot of that goes across, looking at, where that data resides, some of the common places, the uncommon places, even if you look at, identifying kind of where that data is retained. So companies even say, well, look, they're probably backing up their data today, right? Hopefully. And assuming that they are, well, that data is now whether it's in the cloud with a backup recovery company, or whether it's on tape in another, Iron Mountain or wherever it might be, ultimately identifying and understanding that that data resides there is also important, because it's classified as maybe deemed not so critical at a certain point. Maybe you don't need to retain that anymore, right? And you need to know that, hey, it's time to purge that data to free up resources internally, right?
But Zach, storage is cheap. We can just keep adding.
You can keep adding. You can keep adding a lot of things.
So you got to find it. I know that's the challenges.
Well, yeah, and there's some availability solutions that we even offer that make that easier. But it is ultimately, data is growing, right? And it is a cost, even if it's 0.0041 cents a gigabyte. For example, it's still. I'm just referencing a private cloud, or public cloud, but it's still, it adds up. And it hits the bottom line, right? So you want to be efficient, you want to operate efficiently, and obviously drive your costs or keep them down as much as possible. So knowing where that data is and the retention schedules and being able to purge that at a certain point is also very important.
Makes perfect sense. Now, you mentioned some of the uncommon places data resides. What have you seen? What would you say is the most uncommon location that you've run into?
That's really tough. I'll kind of say, because we saw through the channel only, and MSPs kind of have more probably of a visibility into their customers' environments. Sure. We're just taking that data through our applications and getting that protected, right? So, could it be on some piece of paper under some guy's desk? Yeah, very possibly, right? I mean, there's data everywhere, right? I mean, so again, I'll kind of table that answer. I'm sure there are crazy places where data shows up, and it could be on some tape and some guy's, or person's trunk, that they don't have a true backup process, or it's on tape and they're taking that off site and they're doing it, putting it in their car and taking it home every night. Back in the day, used to kind of do the tape rotations, and that's what organizations used to do, and I'm sure people still do that today.
Still finding that information years later, I bet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and obviously, thank goodness for technology.
Well, I'm thinking of some of the, if you look at some of the emerging technologies too, you don't always consider of how to gather it and how to back it up. Like IoT is probably a good example, with many of the companies pulling that in, pulling information from social media, or even what was the one of drones? Drones is one that I've been running into more recently, of where they're getting MSPs being brought in to figure out how do we collect, store the data, make sure it's secure, as well as the platform, which is interesting. I think it's another new revenue opportunity for the channel.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's in certain business segments or verticals, maybe that use drones and things. Absolutely. IoT hit it on the head. I mean, the way things are evolving with technology, there's absolutely a huge opportunity, right? And depending on, and you really need to start understanding, MSPs need to kind of understand their customers' business operations. What do they do? It's not just about the network, but what do they use the network for? What are they selling? Right. So that's important. I mean, you look at more common places, and that obviously can speak a little bit more. We can touch it and feel it a little bit better. But look, data resides, inside the company, right? On site, with employees, desktops, laptops, things like that. The company might have a secondary location or satellite offices. Obviously, everyone has a phone, right? You mentioned mobile. They have laptops. Maybe they're mobile users, salespeople, that sort of thing. So you have very, very basic, common places where that data resides. That really it's low hanging fruit. Everyone has to protect that, and MSPs understand that, right? And then you have things which are now commonplace. External private clouds, right? So, for example, you look at Vault America. Cloud backup and recovery vendors, right? We operate a private cloud for one of our products. For another product, we leverage AWS, right? So even a company using Vault America or another cloud backup recovery vendor, those data's there, right? And so hopefully those vendors, which obviously we are and most are, who we compete with, are have copies of that data in multiple locations. And then you look at kind of the public cloud, right? And cloud infrastructure, right? With everything evolving, Office 365, things of that nature, applications are hosted inside the public cloud. Data is in Azure, it's in AWS. File sync and share solutions, maybe they have their own private cloud, but maybe they're leveraging the public cloud. Right. So don't assume because data resides in an application hosted within the public cloud, for example, that you don't need to back it up.
Yeah. And businesses are changing literally continually from what we're seeing. And a good example, I think, is I have a friend who's an MSP that calls on one of the local regional grocery chains. They have like 5 locations.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing online ordering now. So gathering all that information from wherever that cloud resides to the local stores, and bringing in information from social media. They're trying to do a lot of metrics and things like that to improve their marketing. This is a small regional grocery chain. It's like in the past, it was straightforward. I'd go in and I was backing up the register.
Yeah, that's it.
Processing. Surveillance was like the most difficult thing. He's like, now they're getting into things that I had to ask because I wasn't even aware they were doing.
Right. Yeah, I think those types of organizations, any organization now, and if I take it back to kind of what we were talking about with data classification, right? I mean, the third and fourth point, which is classifying value, right? I mean, what data, these companies need to determine, what data needs to be protected, right? And with new technologies, and like you just mentioned, I mean, that data is now valuable, right? And MSPs and their customers, they need to figure out, okay, well, how valuable is that data, right? Assign a value, whether it's 1 to 10 or whatever the metric is. Just figure out, what needs to be protected and how do you value that, right? Is some data more valuable than others, right?
Does the retrieval come into that point too, as far as the value? Like if I'm thinking business continuity, getting systems back up and running, I would imagine the classification fits into that as well, right?
100%. Yes, it does. Typically, if you just kind of focus on the three most common places that we talked about where data actually resides, right? Inside the company, maybe in external private clouds, in the public cloud, whether it's infrastructure directly. If you look at it, if you just take it one at a time, maybe, and say, okay, inside the company, how quickly do I need to restore, right? How far back do I need to restore to in the event of a disaster? What machines do I need to protect, right? Do I have a server? So if you look at it, a company typically might have a server on site still. They have desktops. Well, they should have a local backup copy on site, right? And also be getting that data offsite to the cloud. Mobile users, okay, well, maybe they just have their laptop, right? Maybe they're never at the home office. Well, at that point, that mobile user should back up and have some software on them that back up directly offsite to the cloud. And then you look at those same type of companies. Well, maybe a company that has 2 or more physical locations or satellite offices. Well, those locations should also be protected, hopefully in the same fashion, right? Mobile phones should be protected. But then you get down to saying, okay, well, you look at that value, and then you also need to look at the budget, right, of that company. And depending on the budget, maybe instant failover on site and off site into the cloud makes the most sense, right? So you should have a BDR solution and deploy a BDR solution for that end customer. But maybe at the satellite offices, well, the budget's maxed out and we can't have BDR solutions all over the places. You can't have, 3 Maseratis, even though you'd like 3 Maseratis. Well, at that point, then you can complement a general cloud backup and recovery solution for files, folders, desktops, laptops, even servers. Maybe it's not a failover solution you have at that secondary location, but you kind of marry the two together, right? You build that toolkit, so to speak, that the MSP should be building for those data protection solutions and tools to then deploy at the customer site, so they can accommodate the customer's budget and needs and RTOs and RPOs and all of that kind of stuff.
So they may want to go to Corvette level instead of Maserati level.
Satellite location number 2, sure. You might want to do that. You might have to do that, right? So, but then you look at, kind of the second thing, which is, we talked about protecting data in external private clouds, right? And again, I defer to most companies, vendors like ourselves who operate, a backup and recovery service as a service provider. And it's up to us to have our own redundancy and replication, right, with multiple copies of the data that's already backed up. But then you also have others who are leveraging the public cloud and public cloud infrastructure directly, via, those applications, right? MSPs are making some good money, I think, migrating customers off legacy on-site Exchange servers to Office 365, right? Well, again, that information, just because it's in Microsoft Azure, right, it still needs to be protected. because Microsoft simply just provides the application, right? It's hosted, but they're just providing the application, so you still have to back it up.
Sure. Right? So obviously, when it comes to compliance, it doesn't matter. They will treat a company the same regardless if they have hybrid or traditional cloud services they're utilizing. What comes into play as far as compliance on a hybrid environment?
I think if you look at, I kind of break it down when you look at compliance, the facilities, because again, it's the cloud's just a data center someplace, right? But if you look at it, I'll give you kind of two examples. One is just looking at a data center example first, right? If data is in a public cloud, that public cloud really must meet certain regulatory guidelines, right? Ensuring compliance for those customers in those regulated industries. And I think the public cloud providers do a pretty good job of meeting those regulatory standards, whether it's SOC, HIPAA, PCI, GDPR, ISO, et cetera. So I think, making sure that wherever that data resides, whatever, say, public cloud or target destination that data is going to reside in, from a compliance standpoint, needs to meet those baseline standards, right? The data center itself. And then you look at kind of the second example I would give is probably you look at a software application, right? And I keep going back to Office 365, the suite, because simply it's not compliant unless you spend lots more with Microsoft per user, right? So from an MSP standpoint, that's why a lot of these folks, even involved America, we're providing Office 365 backup and archiving. We're a little bit unique there because we do provide a true compliant archiving solution. And so a lot of folks who are MSPs who are in certain verticals, right? Financials specifically and a few others, if they're using and migrating their customers to Office 365, well, guess what? Backing up, just basic backup of Office 365 doesn't cut it, right? You need to be able to retain that data in an archiving fashion with e-discovery tools and everything else. So when you look at the Office 365 application, you really need to be able to, provide a true archiving solution, right? Retention for, say, 7 years, for example, or 5 years, or whatever is mandated by that regulatory, body. And if you look at the application itself, and speaking of hybrid, in Office 365, right, what's really in the cloud, right? Well, obviously the emails, right, is in Azure. OneDrive, which is part of that O365 suite, is in the cloud in Azure. But Word, Excel, those other docs that, or applications, I should say, that come as part of that O365 suite, that's not in the cloud. Right, those are just applications, right? Maybe they're. I only restate. Those applications might be hosted in the cloud, but the data, the documents and things that are created by the user, those reside and are basically they reside on your laptop or desktop, right, on site. Now you could sync to OneDrive, okay, but the point I'm trying to make here is in regulated industries, okay, OneDrive alone is not compliant, right? It's just like hosted email in Office 365. It's not compliant, right? It's basically just Microsoft providing the application and that data resides there. So there are a lot of companies that provide a backup solution, right, for data that's already hosted, specifically, OneDrive, specifically email in Office 365. And then you take it one step further. And if you look at compliance, right, in certain industries, well, that data has to be now not just backed up, but archived as well. So whether it's healthcare, finance, et cetera, data has to be retained for a certain period of time, easily searchable with e-discovery components and things like that. So those are the two examples I think I would kind of present when it comes to compliance, two different angles.
Right. So when you're looking at like Amazon and Office 365 are good examples of, platforms that MSPs really need to look at. It's not only an opportunity for consulting to make sure the security is in place and putting the right solutions in place, but the consulting side of it, making sure that your clients are compliant and following all the best practices it really is a responsibility that falls back on MSPs and the businesses. It does. Amazon and Office 365.
It does. I think AWS, Amazon, they're more of an infrastructure play, right? I mean, you can host things there and everything else. They're not really providing, Amazon, Excel or Word, right? Things like that, right? Applications such as that. They're more infrastructure. So they have a, they have a requirement to obviously make sure that everything's maintained as, Microsoft Azure does as well. Microsoft provides, obviously more of the application level that that users will use, right? Just because of Office, really, things like that. So
they might a little more dangerous because I think users a lot of times assume that the security is good enough that's in 365.
They do. I mean, we haven't created a document just for our partners because they said, wait a second, why do we have a need? Why is everyone selling backup for Office 365? And we got this question quite a lot this past year. And we said, well, guess what? OneDrive and your email, just because it's in Azure, it doesn't mean they're backing it up. They're backing up their infrastructure. These public cloud providers, absolutely, right? But they're not in the business of restoring your data, right? Period. That's not what Microsoft does. If you pay for archiving and it's a higher cost per user, then sure, you're going to be able to get that retention, right? And things like that. But and maybe once things are in the recycle bin, like even if you look at Dropbox, right? It's from a compliance standpoint, things still need to be backed up, right? It's just an application where you can file share and things like that. So, it definitely becomes a bigger job, I think. And MSPs are now kind of understanding, oh, well, yeah, these vendors are creating applications to back up things that are already in the cloud. Why? Because they need to be backed up. And really the owner, whether it's Microsoft or Salesforce or whatever it is, it's not their job to basically restore your data, right? Or keep it for a certain amount of time, or recover in the event of a disaster. They're just providing the application, right? And that needs to be kind of understood. And I think it is more and more. And it's a revenue opportunity for the MSPs, absolutely, right? And the vendor.
So we've come to the conclusion, I think, from our discussion is data can be everywhere. It can be very difficult to find and manage, especially even in the hybrid environment. So how does Vault America, Zach, help its partners find and address especially the hidden data concerns for MSPs and their clients?
Sure. So we have our products are aligned under four pillars. And essentially right now we provide 4 types of data protection and data availability solutions really to protect and be able to access data, to have our customers and partners access data when it's needed, right? And you started out like kind of in the introduction, Brian, you mentioned our 4 pillars, right? Backup, recover, archive, and discover. And I'll break that down just a little bit kind of on the use case side. But our backup piece is Vault America Cloud Backup and Recovery. And that's where our MSP partners and prospects, they plug us in because they know that, okay, for customers that, have their 1 office or 2 offices or whatever it might be, we have an application that they can install and back up Windows and Mac and Linux and things like that. Those servers, desktops, tablets, laptops, right? Customize retentions and basically just get that data backed up. They can back it up locally because I believe it's very important to have a local copy, right? Because not in a disaster, different levels of disaster, a lot of people just by accidentally delete a file, right? So to get that back, why have it come back from the cloud, right? So I think having a local backup copy is very, very critical. It makes for a quick and easy restore. So that's kind of our backup pillar. Then we kind of look at recover, our second pillar. And this really caters to almost more mid-size, even enterprise, right? More the SME type market who are running virtual machines. They are okay with leveraging the public cloud, specifically in our world, it's AWS, for disaster recovery, right? The problem with a lot of these public clouds, they're hard to, sometimes you need solution architects, right? And certifications to understand how the heck Amazon runs, how to build a service, how to deploy it, right? Or Azure. So there's a lot of training that goes into that. So our Vault America under the Recover pillar, Vault America Availability, we're essentially able to scan a network, a virtualized environment running VMware, and protect all that data in those VMs, automatically create a connection into AWS within 10 minutes of deploying our software, and then allow a customer to point, click, spin up a VM in an instance or their entire data center, if it were to go down, fail over into AWS in a cost-optimized fashion, protect you while you're in AWS, and then essentially fail you back, completing the loop. So again, another solution, data protection, data availability solution, a little bit of a higher level solution for the right type of customer. And then you look at our third pillar, which is archive. And again, we talked about it. Companies need to be compliant in certain industries, right? So we have a fully compliant Office 365 archiving solution that allows companies, MSPs, to literally bolt on to their Office 365 migration plan or licenses they're selling their customers, an Office 365 backup archiving solution. And in my opinion, every MSP should, when they're selling an Office 365 license, they should increase that price by X, including to include a backup archiving Office 365 solution, increasing their revenue per seat and profit margin as well. And furthermore, and most importantly, or as importantly, because we're always here to make money, but protect the customer, right? And do right by them.
And that's not always like the large. You think of archive a lot of times as the large enterprise companies, but because it's like Sarbanes-Oxley and other being able to replicate. But honestly, it's also the medical facilities, doctors' offices that have to replicate, law offices, for example, for discovery, and even municipalities.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of information they have to be able to. They can't afford to lose it for one thing, but they also have certain time limits of being able to share that data.
Absolutely. It's not only Office 365 either. I keep driving that home a little bit because it's a natural fit, right? Because a lot of MSPs are migrating, throwing those licenses to the customers to migrate them to Office 365. But if you look at it too, some of those, whatever organization there is, like you said, data is being created more and more every day. And data is also, when you put them in certain silos, and what's critical, what needs to be, maybe this needs to be in long-term storage, right? So within our capabilities, Vault America is also able to say, okay, if you want to leverage, Glacier and AWS for long-term storage, we have the tool to be able to connect to AWS and basically leverage that AWS Glacier storage, right, which is very inexpensive for long-term storage and long-term archiving of, data, right, pure data and information that doesn't need to be hot and restorable quickly, but needs to be retained. Right. And I'll just, finally, our fourth pillar, I'll just touch on it, which is discover. And we talk about, data protection. We talk about data availability. And when we talk about data availability, sure, it's being able to restore and recover when you need to, right, and what you need to. But with data, basically across cloud drives now, right? It's growing rapidly. Businesses adopt cloud solutions, right? They're using data's in OneDrive. It's in Google Drive. It's in Dropbox. So we have something called Vault America Hybrid Cloud Search, HCS. And we're essentially able to just connect to all these different silos, even your local server, index all that information very quickly. Now, this isn't even a DR solution. This is just a way to instantly find files on your network and across cloud drives with just a few keystrokes. So that's something where finding information quickly, right, is important, especially in larger organizations. Smaller ones, it's a cool tool and it adds revenue for the MSP very nicely and easily. But again, it's very important with all the data being spread out and dispersed to find information and have it at your fingertips, because the longer it takes somebody to find some information, more time is burnt and it costs the company more. So those are kind of some of the ways that, we're able to kind of support our MSP partners in the industry to further, obviously align themselves and gain revenue and support their end customers with these types of solutions.
Very good. Great overview. And if partners are interested in learning more about Vault America, I would assume they can go to vaultamerica.com.
Yes, they can just go to vaultamerica.com, and we have a request form on our website as well. And obviously, we're happy to kind of get our solutions on their radar and see, maybe one fits, maybe all fit. maybe none fit, but we'd love to just get on our partners and prospects radars to kind of share with them our approach, our solutions that I typically, when we have a conversation, at least 1 out of 4 are complementary, and allow us to engage in a partnership, moving forward.
Very good. And you can also check out, I know that Vault America is a member of IoTSSA too, so there is information on our website if you want to take a look at the showcase.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Any final thoughts before we close? These come to a close too quickly every time we're on the discussion, Zach.
So I think I would just say that MSPs, right, by helping your customers and prospects, classify their data, they will better understand the importance and value, right, of their data, whereby kind of making them more aware of the solutions that you, the MSP, provide to protect their data. If that doesn't make them value their data, going through that data classification exercise, because it really is important and the foundation, I believe. But if that doesn't make your customer value their data and pay you to protect it, I'd say don't waste any more of your time with trying to sell that customer data protection solutions. Wait until they experience a disaster event and they will come crawling back to you. That is if they are still in business, or just don't take them on as a customer, because ultimately, you can't serve them right if you're not protecting their data. So maybe some harsh words, but I think reality is reality. And I believe that, your customers should be protecting their data. And if they can't, or don't want to, or don't think it's worthwhile, then there's a deeper issue there.
And in many cases, liability can fall back on the MSPs these days. So you have to be selective.
That's right. Right. Or get them to sign something.
So on behalf of IoTSSA, I'd like to thank Zak Karsan of Vault America for joining us today, as well as you for following our podcast series. I encourage everyone to check out all the great channel cybersecurity content on the association's website, and hope to see you at one of our upcoming events, which, by the way, the next stop for the IoTSSA Cybersecurity Expo is at Topgolf Meeting Facility in Columbus, Ohio on May 14th, followed by events in Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., and Philly areas later this year. So thank you. We look forward to seeing you, and have a fantastic day.